This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview, another in my series on great films. This time it's the 1954 French classic, The Wages of Fear. I'll be talking with Mark Colin-Enders, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Mark Colin-Enders is my guest. He will be talking with me about The Wages of Fear. Like I always do, I like to give my guests a few minutes to talk about who they are, what they do, and their relation to the subject matter. So Mark, welcome. This is the second time appearing. And for those who do not know you or did not see the first interview, could you please give a little background about yourself, who you are, your interest in films, your website, and opening shots about the film under discussion. So Mark.
Yeah, so my background's as a physical therapist or physiotherapist here in Australia. I interestingly work in health and safety, which in some ways has some parallels with the events of this particular film. But as far as my interest in film goes, I run a film society here in Townsville where I live. We tend to show older films, so films that are at least 30+ years old. This is a film we screened a number of years ago that a lot of people really wanted to see and really enjoyed. It's a film I really love as well for a lot of different reasons. It's a fairly long film. It's a very dense film. Got a lot of great action sequences. Despite its length, it's something that keeps the tension very high during the course of the film there as well. And sorry, I meant to mention too some of the other things I do. So I've got a YouTube channel where I don't necessarily review films, but talk around a lot of the backgrounds to films that try and hopefully pique people's interest in watching those particular films. And yeah.
And that's Townsville Classic Films?
Townsville Classic Films is who we are, yeah.
So your society, though, do you go to actual theater to screen it?
No, we often actually screen outdoors. So we find businesses or locations who are willing to host us. We set up our screen, got the stars above us. We hopefully try and find a fairly quiet location so it doesn't distract too much from the film. And yeah, the other thing I guess we do is once a year we bring up film industry guests as well. So just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a film director by the name of Rolf de Heer. So people might know him from Bad Boy Bubby, The Tracker, a number of really great Australian films. In years gone by, we've had people like Bruce Beresford, Peter Weir. So yeah, we've had a lot of really interesting film guests who add to the film experience as well.
So do you have any books or anything out, or are you planning to ever write a book about this film?
No. No. I don't think I'll write a book about films. No, too busy enjoying them.
So let's talk about the first time that you screened The Wages of Fear. Was it requested by the people in your group, or was it something that you found and wanted to share with the group?
A bit of both, actually. There were a couple of members who had not seen the film but heard a lot about it and really wanted to see it. I'd seen it myself and really enjoyed it. So I guess both reasons. It's a film I love watching and have loved watching again and again. Enjoyed it even more on the big screen. And the audience reaction was also very positive on that particular night.
And so is this a membership that people pay into annually? Pay 50 Australian dollars or whatever it is, and
it's kind of changed over the years. So initially we did charge an admission fee, but we found that was kind of an impediment. So people, didn't want to pay an upfront fee and think I only want to see one film. We don't sell tickets because that I guess interferes with the way we're going to operate as a film society. Over the last couple of years, we haven't charged anything for membership. We just ask people to donate, and we've been lucky enough that enough donations to sort of kind of cover our costs and keep us running.
Well, I'm just wondering regarding copyright, if you charge for the individual films and someone found out about it, whatever company, say, that released Wages of Fear, even 70 years later or whatever, might try to sue you.
Well, we always get a screening license for all the films that we screen. Okay. The cost of it changes though depending on the way in which you operate. So if you're operating as a film society, they don't charge you as much because we're there to appreciate film rather than run a commercial venture. And if you were to, again, charge tickets, they would want a percentage of those sort of kind of ticket sales and everything as well. So just to simplify things for us, but also to keep our costs down, we run a membership-based film society. We don't actually charge people anything. And as long as people keep donating money, we can cover our costs and keep doing that.
And how many people are at a usual screening? 50, 100?
It really varies a lot. You know, some of the some of the films I love the most have the fewest people show up. But some of the ones that are sort of kind of more. So we recently screened Bad Boy Bubby, which is, I don't know if it's very popular in the US,
No.
but it's one that's held in sort of kind of fairly high esteem here. We probably got about 60 people show up for that particular screening. We showed the Bela Lugosi Dracula film a couple of years ago. We got about 100 people show up to that. So it depends on the title. Sometimes we can have as little as about half a dozen, sometimes up to 100.
It's interesting. I just recently was doing something regarding the Dracula film. And have you ever seen the Spanish version of Dracula that was filmed?
I've seen bits and pieces. I've got a copy of it somewhere. At some stage, I'm going to watch the whole thing. Yeah.
And my final question, then we'll move on to the film. So do you actually get the reels, or do you use a DVD to screen it?
Yeah, we use either a DVD or a Blu-ray.
Okay.
It's pretty much impossible to find, you know, celluloid copies of these old films. And we don't have the projection equipment and stuff to do that, so.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because the last time we didn't really get to talk that much about it, so it's a good little digression here. But let's talk about The Wages of Fear. And since you are more of an appreciator, as you said, than a critic, what can you tell me a little bit about the background of the film? How was it funded? How did Clouzot, Henri-Georges Clouzot, come up with the idea? Because he had done a few films before, like Le Corbeau. So what can you tell me about the background of the director?
I guess going to the reason what makes this film sort of kind of really attractive, and Clouzot as a director, like he made a number of great films that I personally really love. So this was the first of his great films. Not long after this, he made Le Diabolique, which is a wonderful film. And then in the early 60s, I believe from memory, he made a film called La Vérité, which is a Brigitte Bardot film, which is a little bit obscure, but it's a really, really wonderful, tense drama as well. Clouzot had sort of kind of made his name through this particular film, and through that he was able to, you know, certainly attract the actors and the funding that he sort of kind of needed to make it.
The film itself is interesting in how it's often classed, because a lot of people sort of, I think, lazily sort of lump it as a thriller film. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I did a show on horror films, and I would definitely put this in the horror category. No, it does not have a monster, but if you look at some of the images like Joe in the oil and some of those, and you see the beads of sweat, these are people that are terrified, you know, because basically they're driving, what is it, the nitroglycerin over bumpy roads and whatnot, and every minute. So I can understand the thriller thing, but I also would say this is a true horror film, even though it doesn't have a monster. How do you look at this film?
I don't think it was. I guess it is a thriller in a sense. I think of it as a psychological drama. There's a lot of sort of kind of, I guess, background psychology going on, and you see a transition of these, you know, fringe dwellers, I guess, who sort of kind of are trying to sort of kind of make their way in the world. I think I agree as well that it's a horror film. So that, I mean, the horror goes right back to the very early stages of the film, where Yves Montand, whose character Mario, is, you know, treating Vera Clouzot, you know, quite horrifically as well. He's a monster in a sense, like, you know, the way he treats other people.
And as for the film's reception, I was just looking on. Apparently, it won a lot of awards and did fairly well. How was it received? Do you know, in different parts of the world? Did it fare better in America than in Europe? Did it fare better down under than in Europe?
I think it did well everywhere. So I know that in Britain, when they released it, there was concerns that people really weren't willing to read subtitles. They wanted dubbed films, and this was one of the first films that was released with subtitles rather than dubbing. And there's a couple of reasons why people think that it was successful in Britain, despite audiences not being used to that kind of film. Partly there was a number of English lines during the course of the film. There's quite a few different languages used.
There's an American company, so there's some American characters.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, there's an American character. He does switch between French and English at different sort of kind of times, quite early in the film there. But there's also long periods in which there's no actual dialogue at all. You're just sort of kind of like hanging on the edge of your seat because of the tension on screen. So it was really, really successful in Britain. And on the back of this film, they actually started releasing a lot of other films with subtitles as well, because I guess they'd conditioned British audiences to deal with those kind of foreign language films. I believe it did really well in the States, all over Europe, certainly in Australia as well.
Now, this film, for its day, was fairly unique in that it's basically almost two films in one. The first half, we get the political intrigues, the corporate machinations of the company that these guys work for. Although they're not really employees, they're sort of hired on. They're not full-time employees. And then we get the thriller part, if you want, the taking of the nitroglycerin. How I'm trying to think before Hitchcock. Clouseau has often been compared to Hitchcock, but this is a unique film in that it's almost two separate films welded together. What is your take on that?
You could look at it that way. I guess you could also look at it as having like a really unusually long first act. So it's probably about an hour in before they leave this little shanty town and sort of kind of hit the trucks and hit the road. But I guess that first half of the film is really important because it highlights their desperation. So they're people who are trapped in South America somewhere. They want to get back to France. A number of the main characters, they've got no money. The only option really is to take this very highly paid but also very, very dangerous job. And then again, there's a transformation of the characters as they go from, I guess, a sense of comfort with sort of kind of the way things operate in the shanty town, with then sort of kind of being in the truck and it being them and the road and the nitroglycerin, and the way in which I guess those stressors bring out a different shade of their characters as well.
So this film, the main, well, I don't know if we'd call it the villain. The main backdrop is that an American oil company called Southern Oil Company, which is an obvious stand-in for the then well-known Standard Oil Company of the United States, is doing the typical, what we would call in America, the ugly American thing. They're basically using these locals in an unnamed Latin country in Latin America. The offices of the corporation are sort of like lords, feudal lords almost. They can do just about anything. And as you said, there's a ragtag bunch of foreigners who aren't American nor Latin American there. And so the four main characters that we end up with are Mario and Joe, Bimba, and Luigi. So let's talk a little bit, just setting up who these four characters are in the context of this shanty town that's basically run by the feudal Lord American company.
I guess the first one we're really introduced to in any real sense is Joe. He seems to arrive in town. He's someone who is suggesting he has some amount of money and some amount of power. It's quickly revealed he has very little money, although he is, quite a strong character, something of a bully in a sense, and in some ways is a leader in this sort of kind of particular shantytown situation. He quickly connects with Yves Montagn's character, Mario. Mario has seemed to have been in this town for quite some time. He's got some love relationship going on with Vera Clouseau, Linda, who's, I guess, a barmaid or working in a local bar there. And they sort of kind of hit it off fairly well. They start to form a little bit of a clique, which seems to, in some ways, be almost like an opposition to some of the other main characters you mentioned. So they're within another group, and it's, I guess, that initial clash that sort of kind of sets up, some of the tension in that environment.
Yeah, and Vera Clouseau, just mentioned her. She's the wife or the then wife of the director, and she later goes on to a starring role in Le Diabolique. In this one, she's oddly playing, I guess, what in American films of the era would have been like the local girl, that she's sort of portrayed as part of the town, coming from the town, and she has a nominal interest in Mario. But
Yep.
it seems that Joe, uh, in the first act, if you will, is the dominant character. He comes off with
Yes.
a lot of, even though he's an older guy and he's short and kind of pudgy, whereas Mario is the Latin, he's the hunky guy, what we call now. He's the more traditional hero looking one, but everyone seems to fear Joe. And the interesting thing is, as the film turns out, Joe is just all talk and no hat, as they would say here in Texas. Um, uh, so what is the dynamic that develops between Mario and Joe? Because they are really the two major characters.
Yeah, I guess going back to sort of kind of Joe and I guess how much guts he had. There's a really important scene in the bar where he's confronted by I forget the name of the character, the Italian character who's a baker.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Luigi.
Luigi, that's it, Luigi, yeah. He confronts Luigi, and there's a bit of gunplay or sort of kind of at least a bit of a Mexican standoff in a sense. And he holds his nerve, and it seems like he is a really, really strong character, and he can sort of kind of handle anything. But like you say, when push comes to shove, when his life is really, really a threat, there's no push. I mean, nitroglycerin doesn't sort of kind of listen to sort of kind of any sort of kind of arguments. That's when he sort of kind of goes to water.
Now, probably the character we haven't spoken yet is Bimba.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like the typical Nazi character. He's a German character. From what we find out, he had, I guess his family had been killed by the Nazis or something. We don't know, I don't think, the specifics. But it's interesting that here, less than a decade after the end of World War II, in America, I mean, we still get German characters as Nazis, the stereotype. Here, this plays totally against the stereotype that we have in American film. What can you tell me about the Bimba character or the actor, if you know?
It's an interesting character, like you say. He almost looks Aryan, like the kind of thing Nazis
He's a
actually.
Nazi poster boy.
Exactly right. But he did say he was, I think, working in a salt mine or something like that. So whether he got caught up with the Russians or the Nazis, but certainly his family was targeted by the Nazis without a doubt. He was traumatized from the war, but he's someone who is quite familiar with explosives, it seems. It's shown sort of kind of later in the film. He's someone who certainly sort of kind of holds his nerve, during that, long period where they're on the road transporting the nitroglycerin. And he's someone who is a great problem solver as well. There's a scene getting close towards the end of the film where there's a very large boulder that's sort of kind of blocking their way. He's the one who sort of kind of engineers the explosion that gets it out of the way. But suddenly he's sort of killed towards the end there because they must have hit a rock or something and set off the nitroglycerin.
Now, there's one other character before they go on the journey that I'd like to talk to, and that's the American, I guess he's like the foreman of the oil field, a guy named O'Brien. And O'Brien seems to have connections within the town. He's the guy who makes the final decision on who's going to get, because they're going to be paid something like 2,000 American dollars a piece, which in 1950 something dollars is probably 3 or 4 years worth of a salary. And all of these 4 guys basically have dreams of getting out of there and going back to their lives. What is your take on the O'Brien character? Is he sort of like the devil making bargains with these guys?
It's certainly revealed fairly early that him and Joe have a history. They've known each other for some time, and it goes back some way before the timeline of this particular film. They're quite friendly, and he's I guess seeking to do Joe favors at any possible turn. But initially, Joe isn't selected to go on this particular trip because O'Brien believes he's too old, he doesn't sort of kind of still have the nerve, that kind of thing, which turns out to be true subsequently. But then there's 4 drivers chosen. One of the 4 drivers doesn't show up, and Joe's the substitute, so he sort of ends up sort of kind of subbing in at the last minute and going on the drive.
Well, the implication, if I recall, is that It seems
They
that
took him.
Joe had gotten rid of him somehow. Maybe not killed him, but detained him.
It made him go missing. Yes, most
Yeah.
definitely.
So they're ready to go on this trip, but it's interesting. A fire erupts somehow in one of the oil fields, and basically it's like needing the nitroglycerin to cause an explosion, like a birthday candle to blow it out. The implication, if I recall, is that this might have been some kind of act of sabotage by locals in the country. We don't know necessarily, but I always get that interpretation. What am I wrong?
Oh, I didn't get that interpretation.
No.
Like I think, going back, I guess, to my background in safety, like, if this company was operating today, they couldn't get away with these kind of practices.
Yeah.
The sense I got that, safety was pretty lax on the site. They had, like you said, a lot of locals working there, probably people who weren't well trained, and whether they were taking shortcuts or whether they made mistakes, I think that's what led to the explosion.
And supposedly, I think this isn't the first time that's happened, if I recall, in the film.
No, probably not, no.
So,
but I guess just going back to O'Brien as well, you talked about him, and he was quite a complex character. So at the time of the explosion, I think their foreman was really badly burnt, and he was completely lacking in empathy, for his situation, and that guy eventually died. But then at other stages during the film, like for example, when they're about to send these guys on the road, they were quibbling about whether they could pay them peanuts to do this job, whether they should pay them appropriately. And O'Brien was the one who spoke up and said that, they're putting their lives at risk. We're going to pay them properly. So he was kind of a complex character. And in some stages, he was really quite heartless. In other stages, he was, I guess, quite a fair person.
So the four guys are driving two trucks. It's Bimba and Luigi in one, and then the two main characters, Joe and Mario, in the other. And we probably, in the second half of the film, or second two-thirds, whatever it is, of the film, we probably get 2-1, I'd say. We get maybe a third of the time with the two lesser characters, maybe 2/3 of the time with the major characters. And we find out a little bit more about them. Their personalities come through. Their relationship comes through. During the course of the trip, because they have to go a couple of 100 miles up and down valleys and winding treacherous roads across palm tree bridges. I mean, literally with these heavy trucks against bridges that look like I wouldn't want to just walk across. Let's talk about the two lesser characters. In the whole course of their going to the oil field, what do we learn about them, and how do they differ from the two major characters?
I guess before they even get in the trucks, we learned that Luigi is not a well man. He's been a concrete or a bricklayer or something like that. He's got a lot of this concrete in his lungs, and he's at the doctor getting a checkup, and the doctor's basically telling him he's got sort of kind of 6 to 12 months to live. So in some ways, that's his motivation. So nothing to lose, chance to make enough money to get out of there, get back to Italy, hopefully find a woman, get married, sort of kind of live the rest of his life as best as he possibly can. In the, I guess on the road, we learned that he's actually probably a lot braver than he seemed earlier in the town. So he was the one who, had that confrontation with Joe and backed down, had a gun in his hand, basically uncocked the trigger, walked away because he didn't have the nerve. But we find when he's on the road, he's certainly sort of kind of got that nerve, and he's a much stronger character than we first believe. With the other character, like you said, sort of kind of we learned his backstory about the Nazis and time in a salt mine. A little bit of sort of kind of backstory about his father, but I guess he remains a bit of a sort of kind of an edge character. We don't sort of kind of really see him, I guess, as a fully formed person. He's just a bit of a foil for the other actors or the other characters in the film.
Well, Bimba, if I recall, is the character that seems to have the most knowledge about, because he's the guy who I think comes up when the road is blocked by a big boulder. I think he's the character that comes up with how to drill into the rock, blow it up without blowing up the truck, and get it out of the way. So he seems to have a lot of skills, probably acquired in the salt mine.
Yeah, potentially that's the case. Yeah, he certainly understands explosives, and he sort of kind of works out how to remove that particular rock. Um, Other than that, the only other thing that sticks out is he starts shaving not long before he actually gets sort of kind of blown up, because I think there's something about his family history, and he always feels that he should be looking his best even if he's about to die.
The two major characters, then Mario and Joe, they seem to form this bond before they go. As you said, after the confrontation that Joe basically stares down Luigi, Mario, I guess you would call it a de facto father-son relationship that they seemingly have going or budding. But it becomes rather apparent early on in their relationship, driving, that Joe is a total fraud. I mean, forget the fact that he's a con man or doing illegal things, but his whole persona is a fraud. And Mario starts to see through this in a series of episodes. Um, uh, can, what are the main things that sort of chart the descent of Joe in Mario's eyes, from this hero to this coward?
Yeah, it starts really, really early. So they've only been on the road a matter of hours, and he's already unwell. I think they pull over the truck. He gets out to sort of throw up, or feels like he's going to throw up. And at that point, they had been in the lead of this convoy because they were going so slow, largely because of Joe. The truck behind them basically decides to pass them and take the lead. They get a little further along the road where there's a lot of corrugations in the road, and if they because they don't want to shake up the nitroglycerin too much, if they either need to go very, very slow, something like about 6 or 8 miles an hour, so that they don't disturb their cargo, or they need to go at about 40, so that they're basically flying along the top of those particular corrugations. And Joe's all for going super, super slow, and Mario's more for, we need to go at speed so we can get there, otherwise we'll be days and days and days on the road. A little further along, again, there's issues with, I think, as they get up into the sort of kind of hilly area there, there's a bit of a dogleg turn they've got to do. There's a construction, like a wooden platform, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah.
They need to sort of kind of drive up, back onto the platform, and sort of kind of go around. Because they've gone second, the truck that's gone ahead of them has highlighted that this bridge is a little rotten in places. There's water leaking out of the hillside. Their wheels have gone through a section of the bridge and created quite a big gap. And at that point, Joe's saying, "That's it. We're done. We need to go back. We can't go any further. Obviously, this thing isn't stable." And Mario says, "No, we've got to go on." And he's sort of kind of formulated a way in his head to avoid the pitfall in the bridge, come up over to the edge. He needs Joe to actually, guide him. And he needs to come all the way back on this platform before he can go up and around. In the process of doing that, he essentially just about, I think, knocks Joe off the back of this platform. He's worried. He dives down, goes looking for Joe, finds his hat, can't find Joe, looks up, sees him scrambling up the hillside, basically running away. And then, Mario continues, gets the truck up the hill, gets him back in the car. And I guess from that point, he's a really diminished figure. In some way, I guess he finds some kind of redemption very late in the film. So after the first truck has exploded, it seems to have ruptured an oil line, which has then created quite a lake of oil. And that becomes an obstacle for them because they need to get through. And, Joe wades into this oil, wades ahead of the truck. And he's there sort of kind of trying to sort of kind of see it through. In the process, he gets his leg run over, and I guess over the next several hours, as they get to where the oil fire is, he's in the process of sort of kind of slowly dying. And I guess that's where his redemption is. He shows that he's probably a much stronger character, or a much stronger person than he ever really believed.
Yeah, it's interesting because you get him as the sense that he's a total phony in the beginning, but the characters don't. They go through this. Mario seems to realize what the audience has sensed, and then in the end, he does. I don't know if I would call it selfless, but he does sort of semi-redeem himself in that way. But then they see ahead, boom, there's the big explosion of Bimba and Luigi's truck, and I don't think we ever find out what really caused it. We can presume it was they might have hit something, or
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe there's some animal there that they hit, or something. And yet through it all, Mario does make it to the oil fields. And so let's talk about that little scene that sort of ends things there. When he gets there, he successfully gets there. They blow out the fire. Uh, he gets his 2,000. I don't. I does he
I
get
think
the?
it was 4.
Oh, he gets Joe's share.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then we get an ending that I don't know is kind of interesting, but it's one of those endings that I'm not certain is necessarily the best ending. It's not a bad ending. For example, like when I first watched Rashomon, the film is great, but I never liked. I thought it's one of the weaker endings for a great film in that you have the sun come out, the guy walks away with the babies, and the sun lifts, light, everything is good in the world. This ending, well, I'll let you talk about it. What is the ending there once Mario helps put out the fire?
Yeah, I guess there's a scene earlier in the film where Joe has a very strong dislike of music, or the music playing in the radio, and that starts the initial conflict. But then, like you say, after the oil fire has gone out, news gets back to the cantina, wherever where Linda is, waiting for hopefully Mario's return, and they start playing music. They're dancing. They're celebrating he survived. And it seems at the same time he's got the radio on in the truck playing the same music. And whether it's relief, whether it's joy, he's kind of weaving sort of kind of left and right across the road, almost in tune to the music. And through that, I guess, lack of care on a mountain road, he kind of loses control of the vehicle. It smashes through what looks like a stone barrier, and the truck sort of kind of cascades off a cliff.
Well, yeah, and the character, it's not like he's even what we would say a daring death. I mean, it's like he's seeking it because he's almost gleefully he's going back and forth, boom, boom, boom. I mean, it's like he's gotten double the wages, but three of his comrades are dead, and it's like he's almost lost any sense that life has any meaning. And what's interesting, I mean, I don't know if that's the one thing in the film that I wouldn't say is a flaw, but it doesn't seem to fit in with Mario's personality. Yes, he seems to be the most emotional. Well, maybe not the most. He seems to be have the most potential, say, of the four guys, but after their deaths, he seems to want to just so eagerly throw that away. What do you think psychologically was going on with the character there, and how does that tie into the idea of it being a horror or a thriller film?
I think he's the most self-centered character in the film. Like he clearly really cares for no one but himself. Like there's a brief period there where it seems like you say, Joe is a bit of a father figure and he seems to care for Joe. But I guess when Joe is diminished in his eyes, he sort of kind of discards Joe to a sense as well. Joe's a means to an end. He drives over his leg. He knows he's about to basically run over someone who's supposed to be his friend, and continues on because he wants to get out of the oil pit. He wants to sort of kind of get the money at the end. I do tend to think that that ending is a little weak. It's probably the weakest part of the film. In some ways, it seems a little out of character. I don't really agree that he has any kind of death wish, that he wants to die. He just seems like all these problems are solved, and he's sort of kind of somewhat free, and he's being somewhat careless on the road. He thinks all his troubles are behind him. What's ahead of him is I guess relative wealth and a return back to France where he wants to go. Whether or not he takes Linda with him, I guess is an open question there as well. I don't think it plays into the horror thing. That's why I think it's in some ways a fairly weak ending.
Yeah. So let's talk about the film, well, its remakes, because it says here, I'm looking here on the Wikipedia page, that there was two remakes. I never saw one called Violent Road, a 1958, I guess, American film, but I did see many years ago. I actually saw Sorcerer by William Friedkin, the '77 film. I did actually see that long before I saw Wages of Fear. I probably saw that a year or two after it came out in the late '70s as a teenager. Um, and I don't remember it that much, but I remember when I saw Wages of Fear, I was like, God, this is a much better film. Have you seen either of the two?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Um, uh, so let's talk about the reception of the film. We had talked about it winning awards and whatnot. Um, uh, is how has it critically been received over the years? And I say this specifically because recently, as we're recording, only a week or so before Sight and Sound released its uh, not annual, decennial
Mm.
rankings of films by critics and directors. Has the film risen in stature, or has it stayed the same, or has it, how has it varied over the years critically?
I think, certainly initially it had a very was held in very high esteem. It did quite well, like you said. It won a number of awards. I think over the years it's mostly maintained that sort of kind of particular status. I didn't see where Sight and Sound actually ranked them, but typically what happens with older films is as the years go by, they tend to sort of kind of slip down the rankings a little bit because people like the critics who typically contribute to that particular poll may not be all that familiar with the film. So I guess we're sort of kind of we're playing into contemporary biases. I noticed a couple of the films that were quite highly ranked were fairly recent films I probably wouldn't rank, but that's based on a poll of what is it, 200 or 300 different critics from around the world.
Well, I think initially it was about 800 generally, but then they
Oh,
doubled it
okay.
to like 1,600. Um,
Oh,
um, but I don't know if Wages of Fear is on the Sight and Sound list this time around. I think it has been. I'm not certain if it was. Um, what did the film that do for the main actors? I mean, Yves Montand was a big star in Europe at the time when this was made, I believe. What was this one that made his reputation? I thought he was already well known.
he was reasonably well known. He was more of a singer. He had a relationship with Edith Piaf. She promoted him. He'd been sort of kind of playing in a lot of sort of kind of fairly small venues. Became a better known singer within France, at least, or around Europe. And this was actually his first film and probably his best. Like he went on to make a number of other films, some of which he's pretty bad in. But in this film, he's really quite incredible.
Uh, Now the guy who played Joe was Charles Vanel. I guess that's how Vanel. Uh, oh, do you know anything about him and his career? Was he a noted star?
He was a very big sort of kind of star of French cinema. This was obviously later in his career. He was an older man playing this particular role. I think maybe after this he went on to appear in Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief as the inspector. So yeah, I think he was well known and he puts in a great performance and uh, yeah.
Uh, just to get through the main character, we did mention Vera Clouseau. The guy who played Luigi was called Folco Lully. Do you know anything about him or his?
Don't know. I've never seen him before other than this film.
And the final character, Bimba, was played by Peter Van Eyck, a German-born film actor best known for his roles in The Spy Who Came In From, he was in that, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, The Bridge at Remagen. Okay, so he seems to have had a career both before and after that. Do you know anything about his career?
I honestly haven't seen him in other films. So I haven't seen The Spy That Came In From the Cold and stuff. So I hadn't sort of really picked up on him as an actor outside
Yeah,
of this film.
I have seen both The Bridge at Remagen and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, but I guess he's not a star, so
No.
you don't make that connection. Um, Let me just talk a little bit here about the ending, because I don't know. I recently watched the quote unquote now number one film, Jean Dielman, and then her address, which was by Chantal Ackerman, and it's another film that. I mean, I was not a big fan of Vertigo being the top film. I don't even think it's one of Hitchcock's best films, much less the best film of all time. And this Ackerman film I recently watched, and it had another ending that was. You've probably not seen it, so I won't spoil it if you don't want to know the ending. But it had another kind of really weak ending. But I will say, I don't know if you've ever seen Roman Polanski's Repulsion.
Hmm.
It's sort of a longer, duller, more drawn out version. It's about twice the length of of
Oh,
the Polanski film. So we mentioned Clouseau and his career. Um, I've only seen Le Corbeau, this film, and Le Diabolique. What can you tell me a little bit more about Clouseau's other films and where this film sort of ranks in his internal canon in terms of style, in terms of storyline, and also in terms of quality? Where would you how many films of his have you seen, and where would you rank this film within that canon?
yeah. The three I've seen were this film, La Diabolique, and La Verite. And I don't know. I'd put them all on a fairly similar level. They're all amazing films. Like they're really, and I think this was him at the height of his powers. Um, I think an important element for him was Vera Clouseau. Her background was initially as a writer. She only appeared in, I think, three films, and all directed by him.
Hmm.
And she sort of kind of makes this film a lot stronger, even though she's a minor character. She really makes La Diabolique. She's, I think, the strongest performer in that film, despite being alongside Simone Signoret, who's a great actress as well. She doesn't appear in La Verite. I think she was doing some of the writing with him. She was quite ill at that stage, and she died not long after the film was completed. But it's easily Brigitte Bardot's best film, and it's a really, really powerful drama. If you haven't seen it, you certainly should. It's a wonderful film.
La Verite, yeah. I've seen three or four, maybe five Bardot films. Uh, what was I going to say? So, do you think that the comparisons to Hitchcock are apt? And the reason I ask is because, to me, Hitchcock is a popcorn director. If you look a lot of his films, he's so devoted to Freudianism, the Freudian idea of the psychology of human beings, that for me, a lot of his characters come off as just cardboard cutouts. Whereas in this film, uh, to me, Clouseau is much more is a much more realistic director, even in something like Diabolique, uh, uh, where we don't know if there's something. I mean, the ending is a twist on a twist, and we don't know if there's something uh, supernatural going on or not. But it seems to me that Clouseau is much more in touch with a lot of other French directors, like a Bresson, Robert Bresson, who was sort of a contemporary, or actually a contemporary, and that he goes a little bit deeper than Hitchcock. Do you think that the comparisons of Clouseau to Hitchcock are a bit facile, or what is your take on comparing the two of them?
Yeah, I think they were probably successful around the same time. Maybe that's where some of the comparisons come from. I don't think they made films that were any way similar. One thing I really enjoy about Clouseau's films is that, speaking about this particular film, at the very start, you don't really like a lot of the characters. They're pretty hideous people. But there's a lot of redemption, as they're put through, very, very stressful events. The same thing goes with La Diabolique. You have a different perception of the characters at the start as you have at the end, and it's very, very true of La Verite. At the beginning of the film, you think, Bardot's character is, quite an airhead, but she's actually a much sort of kind of deeper thinker and a more caring person. And the same is true of a lot of the other characters as well. He seems to find a way to sort of kind of almost flip your sympathies on their head. So at one stage you're cheering for one character, by the end of the film you're completely cheering for a completely different person. And I don't think Hitchcock did that. Like it was very much about I guess some of his hang-ups. Hitchcock was very distrustful of authority.
Yeah.
And his films were always about people in authority getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't. That's what happens with Clouseau films.
Yeah, I think Hitchcock, because he was quote unquote the master of suspense, relied more on gimmicks than character development. A good example to compare against this film would be Psycho, because Psycho abruptly changes, just like this film has an abrupt change.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
but it's and I think Perkins does a good performance. I think the acting is all good, but if you look at the way Psycho goes from a caper movie to about a psychopath, and again a very Freudian like psychopath with the mother fixation, and then you look at this one where it starts out as, I guess you might call it a political intrigue movie, and then it becomes a thriller slash horror film and an existential thriller horror film. It seems more natural. It seems richer and deeper, and that's the difference for me between the two directors.
That's certainly a difference. I think there are other differences as well. Like one thing that struck me about this particular film is, that opening for 10, 15 minutes or so is very visually rich. So if you think about, there's a really unusual scene where I think there's a child playing with 5 cockroaches tied to a piece of string.
Yeah.
There's a lot of puddles and mud around, giving us the sense that, these people are bogged, they're stuck in this sort of kind of particular town. There's these random vultures around the place there as well, which again sort of kind of has, connotations towards what these characters are like, and, whether they're scavengers in a sense as well. I don't think Hitchcock used that kind of imagery in the same way that Clouseau did in this film anyway.
Yeah, and also with very few exceptions, maybe in his final 10 years he tried a little bit. Hitchcock was always contained to a studio. Here, we're clearly out in the real world, and
Mhm.
and the black and white, especially, you get a sense of the oppressive heat because I don't know if it's limestone, but the rocks, the hills. I mean, I mean, it would almost be bright as day if you were watching this in a dark movie theater because the light is oppressive, uh, and that I think adds to the realism, which is something that I think probably wasn't an issue when they were both directing, but now 6, 7 decades on, when was the last major film in Hollywood or Bollywood or anywhere really filmed 95, 98% indoors the way Hitchcock did it? Hitchcock's
Mhm.
films look older. They feel older because of that Freudian kind of thing. This, I mean, if you got the, what do you, they made the pixels, added pixel, and you could believe this was almost filmed in the last year or two.
Certainly from the look of it, like the thing which is obviously sort of kind of dating it a bit is the willingness of a company to take that kind of risk with people's lives. I don't think a contemporary company would necessarily.
Maybe in Europe or Australia, but in the U.S. It's still very relevant, I think.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
that's terrible.
Um, and that gets back to the political aspect of the film. Um, do you think that the film works as political art, and even though it's basically a horror or existential thriller?
Um, I think that's maybe a secondary thing. Like that's not the strongest thing about the film. The strongest thing is the drama and the thriller aspect of it. There's a lot of, I guess, secondary sort of kind of storylines. So, like you say, the way in which whether they be American or sort of kind of big corporations act in other countries, that probably hasn't changed very much. Their willingness to sort of kind of put people's lives at risk, probably not to the same degree as happened in this particular film. But there's that. Just recently there's been a lot of furor over what's been going on, or what has gone on in Qatar with the building of the World Cup stadiums and the number of workers that died, and how laissez-faire they were with people's safety in that particular environment because they were foreigners largely. So yeah, there's a contemporary political aspect to it, but it's not the strongest and most apparent thing about the film.
Yeah, the one thing that I think that also does date the film, and certainly in mind of the Sight and Sound ranking where they are putting forth films made by people of color and women, is that here we have it's set in a Latin American country. The putative bad guys are the American capitalists, and the 4 protagonists are 2 Frenchmen, a German, and an Italian. So European. So we have bad guy Americans and heroic Europeans, and the locals are shown as basically they're all poor or drunkards or prostitutes or this not. There's scenes of kids just running around, barefoot and poor. So I'm not saying that that wasn't real in that day or whatnot, but that's probably the one thing that to a 25-year-old watching this for the first time would probably date it as well. Do you say about that?
I'd agree completely. Yeah, they are sort of kind of background characters. A lot of the locals or people of color. There's a scene. I'm not sure how far in, but there's a woman in the background, a black woman taking a shower, and I think as she's about to dry herself off, there's a spider sitting on her towel, I think it is. And I forget who, I think it's Joe sort of kind of jumps in, or maybe it's Mario jumps in and sort of kind of kills this thing. But I guess it treats her as being a fairly sort of kind of simpleton sort of kind of character.
Yeah.
And like you say, the children, same story. A lot of the natives are with the locals, I should say, are on the roadside, just sort of kind of waving as the trucks go by. They're kind of bit players, even though this entire film is taking place in their country in a sense.
But again, to compare it to Hitchcock, what is the film that Hitchcock remade with Jimmy Stewart when he goes to another country? I forget the name of it. It just slipped my mind. It just came to me as you were speaking. The man. What the hell?
Been too much.
The Man Who Knew Too Much. Yeah, that's the one he remade with Jimmy Stewart, right, in the 50s. He did it in the 30s, and there Stewart goes to another country. But that's a very typical Hollywood thing because everything revolves around the Stewart character. Where at least here we get a little bit more semblance that it's a more realistic world.
Definitely, definitely.
So let me just wrap up. I will link to Townsville. Is it? No, not that. TownsvilleClassicFilms.com.au, which is your society's website. I do want to end each of these episodes talking about why someone should watch it. So, Mark, in your opinion, why is The Wages of Fear great, and why should someone who has never watched it watch it, even with what we said about a few minor parts not dating well?
Like I said, the opening is really visually rich. It really sort of kind of draws you in very early on and drags you into the world of the characters, which all great films do. I think that interplay between the characters and the way they're set up is interesting, which then morphs into unexpected areas. Even though we've laid it out here. Watching the film is going to be a very different experience for people. It's beautifully shot. It's on some great locations, and it's incredible that a film that's I think close to 2.5 hours long really maintains tension all along the way. Like you kept guessing, you kept on the edge of your seat. It's quite a chilling, but at the same time quite a satisfying experience to watch.
Well, I want to thank you for spending an hour talking about this film. I was just watching your websites, like Julieta Messina. There, I think that's from La Strada.
La Strada, yeah.
Yeah, it was good. So again, thank you for your time and continued success with your society.
Thank you.